Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Come on with us to Acts chapter 27 today. It is the account of Paul and the shipwreck, where they crash the ship, where they wreck the ship into the island of Malta. Sometimes life in general almost becomes an allegory, and I would suggest that Paul's shipwreck almost becomes that. I want to think about some of the things we can learn, as sometimes we almost feel like we are lost at sea. One thing is found in verse 10 and 11. Paul warns them from the outset. He says, "Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo of the ship, but also our lives." Verse 11, "Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul." How many disasters would be avoided in our lives if we would listen to people when they are trying to help us? We get so hard-headed and hard-hearted, and then we look back and we just kick ourselves, because if we would have listened to someone, we could have avoided so much trouble. Think about the difference between the Ninevites and those in Sodom and Gomorrah. Both cities were slated for destruction. What was the difference between the two cities? Nineveh listened to Jonah. Sodom and Gomorrah refused to listen to Lot and, of course, the angels as they came. We would avoid so much trouble if we would just listen to people when they are trying to help us. The second thing I want us to see, verse 18, it says, "Because we were exceedingly tempest-tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. On the third day we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands." When we start getting burdened down, we need to see what Scripture says, because it says that we need to lay aside the weight and sin which so easily ensnares us. Obviously, we need to lay aside sin. But what about the weights? What about the cares of this world that, no, they are not inherently sinful? But if they're burdening us, if they're bogging us down, if they're causing us to be lost, then we need to cast them overboard. If our hand offends us, cut it off, cast it from you. We need to see that the cares of this world, that yes, we lay aside sin, but even some things that are not inherently sinful can cause us to stumble if they distract us from the Lord, and we need to get rid of them. Sometimes we just need to lighten our load, and we need to set our mind on heavenly things rather than earthly things. They cast the tackle overboard, lightening the load. Think about it. Now, in the next few verses, of course, the storm continues, and what we need to see is that just because a person's a Christian doesn't mean there won't be any storms. Paul had storms in his life. Peter had storms in his life. Jesus, of course, had storms in his life. Count it all joy when you fall into various trials. The wise man, the foolish man, they both built their house, and one on the rock, one on the sand. The storms came to both. The last thing I want us to see, what they're going to end up doing, they're going to end up cutting away the skiff. It talks about cutting away the skiff in verse 32. Eventually they're going to cut away the anchors, and they're going to let the ship drive right into the island of Malta, and the ship's going to be broken up. Let's make this point. When we finally find a refuge, there's no going back. The Lord is not a vacation spot. Come to the Lord and build there and stay there. Hope you enjoyed this study. God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow morning.